All right, so now that you have seen the first part of the video, the AP video of the other teacher, let's talk a little bit about how you would enact some of these strategies, specifically the analogy or extended metaphor. So I have an example that I created in class, and I kind of want to take you through the process. This is not the best intro in the world. I did this very quickly, and I wanted to show you how I did it quickly for the purpose of thinking about writing quickly in a time format. So I started with the Othello essay, the Othello morality essay, and I asked, okay, which character should we go with? We went with Iago and talked about his morality, brainstormed some words about his morality, and then I came up with a thesis statement. And I went ahead and used the idea of doing a thesis statement that had the idea of power or agency in it to kind of give it that extra oomph that might make it a more advanced theme to talk about. So Shakespeare shows Iago's manipulative morality, showing that the worst thing one can do is rob others of their agency. That's my thesis statement. I'm not saying it's the best, but it's a pretty good one. So then I had to think, if I wanted to do this strategy that you saw in that other video about creating an analogy, creating an extended metaphor to run throughout my introduction, well, how do you do that? Like, how do you just come up with a metaphor? Well, what I do is I think about the main topic here. Generally, and someone in my other class pointed this out, you might really start with focusing on your theme and try to come up with a metaphor that goes with your theme. Because if we think about that pyramid and going broad to specific, our theme is generally that broad idea. It could also be the topic of morality, but either one of those might be the place where we start broad. And therefore, when we start our metaphor, we want to start with that idea. So, thinking about that, we can think about maybe the metaphor we're talking about is the manipulative morality or stealing agency from other people. So, what is something that we could compare that to? Stealing agency from someone, stealing power from someone, manipulating someone. So, here are some brainstorming things I did: sucking away life like a vampire, a parasite, draining, monster, werewolf, manipulating life. These are some that the students in class came up with. So I just started thinking about what are some things I could compare this idea of manipulating people or robbing people of their agency to. And after brainstorming these things, I decided to go with parasite. And after deciding to go with parasite, then I was like, well, I need to brainstorm some words, some phrases that go along with the idea of parasite to use it in my introduction. So leech, feeding off of, using someone. Symbiotic relationship is almost the opposite, but exploit, latching on, all of those are terms I thought of to connect the idea of parasite. So notice when you come up with a metaphor, first start with whatever the broad idea is, and then think about what you could compare it to. Compare it to something you're familiar with that you know a lot about, or at least some about, so that you can come up with terms. For instance, I had a student who was having trouble and she was a drummer. And so I was like, can you compare this to a musical instrument or a drum in some way? And she found a way to compare it. And then she had all these words she could use to talk about it. So once I had this metaphor, then I start to try to write with it. And I still use the strategy of going broad to specific. So, in still using that strategy of going broad to specific, I start with a sentence that's about that general idea of, I actually went with the general idea of like making your own choices, of having your own power. So, to be human is to make decisions. I guess probably that idea of to be human rather than a bug or a parasite might be related as well. But to be a human is to make decisions, to actively weigh one's choices and choose the best path rather than simply react to stimuli. So actually, let me pause here. We'll talk about how I do this. Let me just read the whole intro once. To be human is to make decisions, to actively weigh one's choices and choose the best path rather than simply react to stimuli. When someone is robbed of their agency and decision-making, what remains is bestial. In Othello, Iago latches on to other characters, feeding off of their goodness, turning their virtue into pitch. Iago is a parasite, draining others' morality for his own evil purposes. Shakespeare shows Iago's manipulative morality, showing that the worst thing one can do is rob others of their agency. So when you take that all together, it's a pretty decent intro. It's more than just that thesis statement, and it also introduces this analogy that if I carry it throughout the rest of the paper, which is an important idea that I would use these terms throughout the whole paper, can really tie it together well. So again, let's go back to how I'm doing that. So starting with this first sentence, which is about that agency and power that is in my theme. So being human is to have that agency, to have that power, rather than just reacting to stimuli. Then I get more specific by actually using a quote from Othello: when someone is robbed of their agency and decision making. So now we're getting into the robbing of it. What remains is bestial, it should be remains. This is a quote, and because I was doing this in class, I knew it was Act 2, Scene 3. I didn't look up the line numbers yet, but I would normally add that in there. So then here's the part, just like in that basic intro we did, where I would introduce the title and the author. So we have the broad topic, we have a specific detail from the text, so kind of flip those two, and then we have the text itself. In Othello, Iago latches on to other characters, feeding off of their goodness, turning their virtue into pitch. Another quote from Othello, kind of elaborating on that fact that he turns their virtue into pitch. Iago is a parasite, draining others' morality. So again, more details specific to that. So starting with the broad theme, not about the text in particular, about the world at large, and then narrowing down into the text itself with more of these. I've highlighted the parts that have to deal with that metaphor, and then going down into my specific thesis statement. So I wanted to show you the process. I know you didn't get to follow it along with me, but the process of trying to use this extended metaphor, it's not just snap and you have one. First, as always, first thing you want to do is come up with your thesis statement, because of course that's the most important. Don't try to build a metaphor without a thesis statement, because you need to know what you're writing about. That's where the bulk of your points comes from. So do that first. Then think about your theme or your main topic, and think about some metaphors that might apply to what you want to say about that theme or main topic. After you choose a metaphor, brainstorm some words that go along with that metaphor. And then you can still use that idea of going broad to specific to start generating sentences and seeing where you can fit in some of this language. And of course, as you write, you might brainstorm more language that fits with what you're talking about. You might decide that your metaphor doesn't really work and you have to go back to the drawing board. That's okay. Writing is a process. But that's what it is. So now, of course, you need to go to trying this on your own, and you can look at my instructions video for that.